a quick presentation to talk a little bit about what this course is going to go over. This is just a demo class, so it'll be a little bit of what we would cover in the first class for this Swift course, and also a bit of an overview of what the entire course will kind of look like. And then there will be an opportunity to ask any questions about the course or anything you want. So let's get started. All right. Can everyone see the screen okay? All right. So this class is going to be an introduction to the Swift language and to Xcode, and then also designing and developing apps, specifically for the Apple ecosystem, so iPhone, iPad, and Mac apps. All right. Oops. The requirements for this class: you will need an Apple Mac computer. So sadly, for anyone that has Windows or Chromebooks, you won't be able to do everything that is required in this class. There are alternatives if you really want to do app development. There are alternatives out there. You could still do Android app development. And then there's a programming interface called Flutter. But in this class, we'll be focusing on the Apple ecosystem, and a Mac is required. And then no programming experience is required at all. In this class, we'll be going over how the language works, and then also things like creating awesome interfaces in this class. So any previous programming experience is awesome. It will probably help you, but it's definitely not a requirement. So the first thing to do is download Xcode, and you can just do this by typing in Xcode on the Mac App Store. And then, yeah, it's pretty big, so it's 12.5 gigabytes, so you definitely need to make sure that you have plenty of space on your computer. And then if you need any help with downloading the app, you can definitely let me know. But we won't spend too much time in this demo class with figuring out downloading the app, just because this is a demo class and I kind of want to make sure we get an overview of what this class is all about. So Swift was introduced in 2014. It was introduced at Apple's WWDC, which stands for Worldwide Developers Conference, and it has become the most popular language for creating Mac, iOS, and iPad OS apps, and it is one of the most popular languages out there at all. There's a ton of software engineering and app development jobs out there if you're looking towards the future. If you want to create awesome apps like Uber, like Airbnb, like Snapchat, this is the language to learn. So why learn Swift? I talked a little bit about this, but it's a super fun and relatively easy language to learn compared to some of the other languages out there. And what's really cool about Swift is you can actually create an app that your friends or actual users can use and enjoy, which is one of my favorite things about the Apple ecosystem and also Swift and Xcode. iOS app developers and engineers are really in demand to learning these skills wherever you are in your coding path, whether you're just starting out, you've never written a line of code, or you may have written some lines of code before, or you may be relatively seasoned in knowing how to code. Regardless, learning these skills can lead to really cool jobs. Companies like Apple itself, or like I listed before, the companies like Airbnb, Uber, Snapchat, Lyft, the list goes on and on. And one of the coolest things is you may be able to create the next new Snapchat, Uber, or Airbnb yourself. So that is pretty cool. If you do, remember me. So in this class, we're going to be talking about designing, developing, and deploying apps. We won't actually be deploying apps to the App Store, although I'll definitely go over kind of how you would do that if you want to in the future. But we will be talking about the basics of Swift and iOS development. And the projects, I really want to make sure that we keep projects pretty general in terms of what you're allowed to create. I want you to kind of let your creativity run wild. And I think the best way to do that is allow you to have time to create your own projects. And one of the things about learning to program in general, and especially with app development, is there are a lot of resources out there to help you learn. You can learn by the documentation out there. There's a ton of documentation. You can learn by YouTube videos. You can learn by other people. The list goes on. And I really want to focus on, instead of just spoon feeding you information, I want to focus on teaching you how to find those resources so that you can teach yourself to a large degree. Let's get started. So if you haven't already, one of the first things that you'll want to do is download Xcode. And like I said, you'll just go to the App Store and download it. It's really easy. You don't have to go to any website or anything like that. And when you download it, you should be able to see something kind of like this. We'll get this opened up. Okay. So when you download it, you'll be greeted with a screen that looks something like this. You'll have different options of different things that you're able to create. You can create for iOS. We'll be mainly focusing on iOS and iPad OS for development in this course, but you can also utilize the skills that you learn in Swift to make Mac OS apps, Watch OS apps, TV OS apps, and a bunch of others. And this can include future things that Apple releases, like if they release an augmented reality headset or a virtual reality headset, it's likely that Swift will be the language that you'll develop with. So to start out, we'll start by just creating a new app. We can just call it hello or something like that. This will be nothing too crazy. And we'll just create it. And it'll take a little bit of time to actually create. And in the first class for this course, a lot of it will probably be spent, making sure that the program has downloaded properly, making sure that you're able to get to this point. So if you're not able to get to this point, that is okay. In the first class, we would focus more on that. But I really do want to spend some time giving you a nice overview of what we're going to cover in this class. So I just clicked resume on the right-hand side. And in a bit, we should be able to see the emulator on this right-hand side, which is a virtual phone running iOS, and that will allow us to be able to see what our code is actually doing. And sometimes it does take a little bit. So while that's loading, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on here. We have some code that is Swift UI. So this is also part of the Swift language. A large part of it is being able to actually create user interfaces. If any of you have done anything in terms of web development, you'll notice some similarities with HTML and CSS specifically. And if you haven't, that's okay. So again, taking a second to load. I know Zoom is probably not helping. But essentially what this app is right now, here we go, there we go. What this app is right now is it has text, which is hello world, and then some padding, which gives us that space right in there. And that is about it, a pretty boring app. And in here, we would be able to edit stuff on this side to actually get things coming up on this side. So in the first course, one of the first challenges is actually making your name pop up on the screen. And again, if you're not at this point, that is okay. So to get your name to pop up on the screen, you can just enter whatever your name might be. And as you can see, the edits are compiled in real time, and you're able to see the changes, which is really, really nice. So I can change whatever I want, typing, and it will change in there. There are a ton of different things that you can add. If you think to your favorite apps, oftentimes they'll have buttons, they'll have different text, they'll have colors, they'll have all this different stuff, they'll have videos, and all this stuff is supported inside of Swift. So you'll be able to actually create those things with Swift, which is super cool. One other thing to notice on the side here, we see things like this text. We can also change things in here. We can change the font, we can change the weight, we can change the color, and this is all stuff that will change the code in real time, which again is really nice. It makes it pretty easy to do simple things. So if we want it to be red, we can change it to be red. And you saw that that code is put in real time. So if I want it to be blue, I just have to click on that and it'll be blue. And you can also do it programmatically as well. We'll do both ways in this class to show how to make different styles of apps and how to make things that you want to create. And that's, again, one of the main, I guess, objectives of this course. Are there any questions so far? That was definitely a fair bit, but this kind of encompasses what the first class will kind of look like. And if you have any questions, you can always put them in the chat as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about other stuff that we'll go through in this class. So in this course, again, it'll be largely up to the student to utilize their creativity and create something new. But some of the things that we're going to be discussing early on in the course, some of the apps that we might be able to create are a basic soundboard app. So if you've ever used like beat makers or a soundboard that just does whatever random sounds you want it to do, we'll be creating a simple soundboard app just with easy buttons and images inside of the buttons. So that's something that you can expect in this class. We'll also be, I'm going to open up another program that will be going over a fair bit in this class. Because one of the things that I also will be going through is how to design apps to make them user-friendly and also beautiful to look at. So one of the programs that we're going to be talking about in this class is called Figma, and it is a browser-based program that anyone is able to use. And it's really nice to be able to design apps and websites and anything that you want. Okay. So this is another program that we'll be going over a little bit in this class. This is not the main focus, because the main focus is still on Swift and Swift UI, creating apps actually in Xcode. But we'll also be doing a little bit in this just so that you're able to plan out your apps that you want to actually create. So just a little overview of things you can do in this. It makes it really easy, and this is also totally free. We can create a little artboard right here and make quick designs or pretty in-depth designs for our apps. So if we wanted to create something like a soundboard, we could just drag over some rectangles and this just gives you an idea of what you want your app interface to look like, because that's a pretty important part of creating well-designed, good apps. So I'm just going to create a little quick kind of soundboard interface. Not that much distance, nothing too crazy. Again, this is not going to be the focus of the class, but it's good to get an understanding of the design of an app as well. So there's our basic soundboard. We can also add images in this program, and we'll be going over stuff like that. We can change the colors of this, make it look a little bit better. And then in our actual Xcode, we'll be bringing something like this to life. So that is kind of the main purpose of using that, is just to get designs out there. Is I really want this class to be focused on you being able to create cool things, which is kind of the fun part about coding, honestly. So are there any questions? I wanted to kind of leave a lot of room to be able to discuss things that you might want to know, because this is a demo course. And I don't have too much in terms of material right now to talk about. So any questions on downloading, things that the course is going to go over, Any questions like that? Are people excited about this course? What do you think? What are your thoughts? So show an app, take an example of an app that a previous student made. So this is the first time that this course is actually going to be run on the AGO Learning platform. So there aren't any previous students right now. So no example that a previous student made at the moment, because we haven't had any previous students. Any other questions? Who here is interested? You can either say it out loud or in the chat. Who is interested in actually taking the course? Share where we could access some tool library. Absolutely, yeah. So the Apple developer website is a really good place to access good libraries. Let me get there 1 second. Okay. So here is the Apple developer website. And there are a lot of really good resources in terms of libraries, documentation, and also places to go look for help as well. So in terms of libraries, you can see news and updates, software downloads, documentation. And there is a ton of stuff here that you can have a look at. As with any technology framework and or library, I personally do not know most of it because it's just really extensive. But yeah, you can see just a ton of different things. There's libraries for using videos. There's libraries for sounds. There's libraries for augmented reality. There's libraries for just about everything that you want to do. So tons of that. You can probably find stuff elsewhere as well from third parties, but this is definitely a good place to start. Absolutely, yeah. Here's a question just for everyone. What are some of the things you would be most excited about for this course? And why would you take the course? I'm curious. For games. Absolutely. That's something that I could probably look into a little bit. Able to implement ideas when I have one. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it so much. I just get really excited about this because I actually, okay, one other question for everyone. How many of you have programmed before? And it's okay if you haven't. Okay, Jeffrey has. Okay. Okay, nice. Wow. That's more than I expected, if I'm honest. That's super cool. Well, definitely having the abilities that you learned with programming, Alex said programming in Scratch, that's totally awesome as well. That gives you a really good understanding of structures of programs. But it'll definitely help in this class. Also not required though. What languages have people used for programming? I kind of want to understand this just so that I'm able to know what kinds of projects we should do. Because yeah, this is definitely a little bit looser and we're still trying to figure things out because this would be a first time for this class. What languages? C sharp. That's a fun one. It's really good for some game development for sure. Any others? If Scratch and C sharp, any Python? Python, Java, Python. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Python and Java. Yeah, I would say Swift is kind of like a combination of Python and Java. I think it's a little bit simpler syntax than Java. Probably a little bit more complicated than Python, though. There's a bit more features. Okay, awesome. That gives me a good idea of what we want to kind of focus on. Is like you saw in the demo, kind of demoed more of the user interface side, and we'll probably focus actually more on that user interface side because there's a lot to cover there. But we'll definitely have some opportunities to also use some cool libraries for things like playing sounds for that soundboard app. One other question, and I don't mean to just ask questions, but I really do want to get an idea of what would be best for students in this class. Would you prefer something that is a little bit more open so you're able to create your own app? Or do you want something a little bit more structured, like this is what we're going to create? Or maybe a combination of both. Well, animation or graph design. So do you mean graphic design? Or actually graphs? Graphic, okay. So some, yes. So there will be some user interface design in Figma. It's nothing like too crazy, too detailed, but when you're creating apps, you want them to look decent. I think it's always better when you have an app that looks really good and you can just be a little bit more proud of it. So we'll talk a bit about graphic design. In terms of animation, nothing very complex. You could definitely look into animation a little bit. I've done a little bit with animation for sure. So making the buttons move to make them look nice and feel good. We will definitely be talking about that for the soundboard app, but nothing super complicated. I think that would be a really good project to work on in terms of the projects that are more open-ended for you to figure things out. Because that's kind of how I envision this to be structured. I want it to be some structured. We're going to create some apps together as a class, but I also want to give you some time to work on your own apps and have fun, because I think that's the most fun thing to do is work on your own apps and be able to create something new. That's just the coolest thing ever when you're able to create an app, especially if we're able to put it on the App Store. Any other questions on things that will be talked about in the class? I really appreciate the questions. Because yeah, this is still a new course. So people that take it will be the first to take it. So that'll be exciting. How many hours in classes are included? Um, to my understanding, this will be around 16 hours. I'm not entirely certain how many classes it will be. I'll have to make sure to confirm that with people that are higher up than I am. But it will probably be around 16 hours. How those classes are split up may be different depending on if I'm the one teaching, if another person is teaching. So that might vary, but around 16 hours. Absolutely, yeah. Any other questions? And then for Jonathan, who just came in, so we're just asking questions about the general course overview. We talked a little bit about some of the curriculum that we're going to be going over, creating iOS apps and Mac apps. And that's kind of the main stuff that we're talking about. I know that there will be a recording of this for those that came in a little bit late if you want to have a look at that. Any other questions on what we'll go over in the course? No further questions, okay? Any other questions from anyone else? Next thing I'm going to do is just show an example of an app that we'll probably create in the future. But I want to make sure that questions are also asked and answered. Because yeah, this is also to make sure that you guys know what this course is all about. And to also make sure that we're able to tailor the course to the needs of the students. Would you guys be interested in talking about, for this course, going into some time about game development in Swift? Maybe creating something similar to like Flappy Bird or something like that? Okay, awesome. So we can definitely do something with game development. I think that would be cool. Because yeah, there's definitely a market out there for iOS games. And there are a lot of libraries out there to work with games as well. Any other questions before we have a look at kind of an example of what we might do? Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll talk a little bit about one of the kind of first projects that we'll be going into. So like I said earlier, we will be doing a soundboard app, and the sounds would be up to you. What the soundboard actually does, totally up to you. Whether you want it to be for music making, whether you want it to have a bunch of funny sounds, whatever you might want, you can absolutely do it. So here is an example of a soundboard app that's pretty easy to make. It doesn't take too long. And we'll have a look at it. So this is more on the funny side of things. This is an app that allows you to play sounds that confuse cats, and it is pretty hilarious to see cats react to it. I haven't changed any of these images, but this is just to show that it can be scrolled if you wanted it to. But I also have a version where it isn't scrolled at all. So that would be up to you. Let's talk a little bit about some of the code up here. So as you can see, it's a fair amount of stuff to make this app, but a lot of this is pretty simple too. So inside of Swift and Xcode, and a lot of this will be totally new, and it's not really important that you remember any of this. We'll talk about it in much greater detail in the actual course. But in Swift, we create things called stacks to create user interfaces. And once you understand kind of how stacks work, that really helps you to be able to make whatever user interface you might want. So the way a stack kind of works is you have different dimensions. So just like in math, you have in a graph, you have different dimensions. And I'm going to attempt to draw, which is sometimes not the best. So you have the y-axis X and then 3D Z. And that's supposed to be 3D. So a Z stack is being able to stack things on top of each other. A V stack is on top of each other, but the y-axis. And then we have some H stacks in here as well that allow us to stack things horizontally. And that just, these stacks are a Z stack, which is the Z axis, V stack, which is vertical, meaning the Y axis, and then H stack, horizontal, which is the X axis. And this just allows us to create nice grids for our user interfaces. And if you look at apps out there, they will often use these to create their interfaces. So you'll have like a scroll view, which allows you to be able to actually scroll this screen. And then you'll have different things on top of one another in a V stack. So this is at the top. And then we have text on the top. I have a bunch of stuff here that modifies it. And then in our H stacks, we have the actual buttons. So that's kind of a really quick overview of how some of this actually works. And we'll be going over this in the course in more detail. But that gives you kind of a general idea of how some of this works. One of the questions was about libraries, so we can talk about libraries real quick while we still have time. Just like in the programming languages that you may or may not have used, you'll be importing libraries just like in any other programming language. So the AV foundation is the one that you want for sounds. So that's what we're using in this program. Moving on, we have some other different things like being able to round rectangles, different other things for styling. So in this app specifically, we have borders on the buttons. In this app also, it gives a demonstration of how you can use padding to modify things, to give it some space between buttons. So that's the idea of that. And then we'll also be talking about scaling images to make them actually look good and keep their aspect ratio so that they look good. So just like with any other programming language, Swift makes it pretty easy to modify things, but there are definitely things that will be a little bit confusing. So things that sound pretty simple, like keeping the images, making sure that they actually have the same aspect ratio, meaning they keep the same dimensions, they don't look stretched or whatever it might be. Doing that can be a little bit of a trick sometimes. So we'll be talking about all those modifiers in the class. So going down, there are other H stacks that show other buttons. And then we'll also be writing functions. So for those of you that know some code already, we'll be writing functions that allow us to do things like play sounds. So this is the function that plays the actual sound. So definitely nothing too crazy. And it's all really fun. And then you get something that actually works. It's an app that you can actually use. So that's one of the first projects that we'll be doing. Again, the sounds will be your own. You can use whatever you want and have some fun with it. So that's kind of a look into the future if you take the course of what we'll be actually going through. Okay, we have 9 minutes left, and I want to give you that time to ask any questions that you might have. If you don't have any questions, you are free to go, absolutely. But yeah, if you have any questions about the course, about the material, about me, whatever you want to ask, I'm here for you in next 9 minutes. Thank you so much, Andrew.